Welcome back to the Middle of Culture. I'm one of your hosts, Eden.
And I'm your other host, Peter.
Hey, Peter. So, how you been? What you been up to the last couple of weeks?
I've been working.
Busy.
And working. I'm trying to think what I've done. I've definitely listened to some music lately. Nothing that, I'm trying to think. There is a Massachusetts area band who dropped a new album. The name of the band is Chained to the Bottom of the Ocean, which, I appreciate. Based on their sound alone, I am going to say that the name of the band is an homage to the 2007 Thou song. We have previously briefly touched on Thou. They did a soundtrack for a video game, if I'm remembering correctly.
I think so.
But yeah, we talked about them a little bit because you had actually brought them up and I was like, oh yeah, no, I've been a Thou fan I think I jumped on the Thou train back in their maybe 2013, 2014 release. I can't remember if Heathen or Magus was the first one that I caught on. Uh-huh. Anyway, they have an older song called Fucking Chained to the Bottom of the Ocean. And I'm going to have to just go out on a limb and say this is where these guys took the name from because it is doom, but it is very sludgy, kind of nasty, really raw sort of sounding vocals with this real heavy doom stuff. So
sure,
I've been getting into them a little bit lately and, a couple new albums. For some reason, I think I was listening to a podcast that was talking about, it's a metal podcast where they take an album and kind of listen to it and go through it. And I was listening to the episode on the 1995 album Demanufacture by Fear Factory. And so that led me.
That's a classic right there.
Down. Oh, it's a fantastic album. And it got me, back listening to some Fear Factory again. And so that was a little fun, kind of diving back into Fear Factory's stuff. And then honestly, still slowly working on the Wheel of Time, but not that much because I just have not had that much time these last couple of weeks.
That's fair. And those books are long. So, it takes a long time to get through one.
It's true. Before we started recording, I briefly mentioned that I'll be making a relatively quick trip to Boise this coming weekend. My 18-year-old is running in the state track meet for the 4x200 meter relay because their team pulled off an amazing first place win the other day, coming from literally fourth place due to their first guy thought that it was a false start, so he stopped running and nobody else did. So then they played catch up and they were able to win and take first place, which is super cool. So I figure I'll have 6.5, maybe even 7 hours because it is not in Boise. It's in Meridian, which is the other side of Boise. But I may have up to 7 hours in the car alone this Saturday. I figure that should at least at double speed get me halfway through a Wheel of Time book, right?
I would hope so. They're long. I don't really know. They're real long.
Getting into Brandon Sanderson and his Stormlight archive has sort of rewired my brain when I think of long. I look at the Audible audiobook narration of these, and a bunch of them are in the high 20 to mid 30 hour range. Yeah. And that just doesn't even register to me as a long book anymore because the Rhythm of War, the most recently released Stormlight archive book, I'm pretty sure it was somewhere between either 52 to maybe 54 hours long. So, if it's less than 50, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. No big deal.
Brandon, concision, my guy.
No. I think this is a complete assumption on my part. I think Brandon Sanderson's novellas and stuff is where he goes, okay, I'm going to exercise restraint. I'm going to try and be concise. This is where I'm going to get that out of my system. And then the Stormlight archive is where he's like, screw it. I'm going to just write whatever I want for as much as I want because they are all excessive. I think the shortest of the 4 books is in the high 40s in terms of hours, the Audible version.
How many pages roughly does a 40-hour book transfer to?
Well, so these all range in hardback from around 1,000 to 1,200 pages. Yeah.
That's 12 books.
When they did the leather-bound special fancy version of The Way of Kings, because it would break the leather binding, it's in 2 volumes.
Ugh.
And again, that's the shortest of the 4 books.
There's no need. There's no need for this. I respect if people enjoy it.
You know, I love the world that he's building so much. For me, it's just such a neat world that he's building that I love having time to spend in it. So, but I totally understand it's too much thought. But, you know, like I say, that's about it for me. So you mentioned beforehand that you've been into a bunch of stuff because of your schedule. So what you been up to?
I have been. I have a list of things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things I'm going to bring up.
Ooh, exciting.
I've had a busy couple of weeks. First off, since you started with music, I too will start with music. So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were doing a rewatch of the movie Arrival. Have you ever seen the movie Arrival?
I have not. I own it digitally, but have just never gotten around to watch it, and I really want to.
It's incredible. We should watch it for this podcast.
Let's do it.
But in part of that movie, they use that Max Richter song that gets used in like every single movie, and it's used in The Last of Us, and like I can't think of the name of it right now. Something on like "And the Nature of Daylight" or something like that. It's as soon as you hear it, dear listener, if you go look up famous Max Richter song "Last of Us" or Max Richter song "Arrival," you'll hear it and you'll be like, "Oh yes, I've heard this song in 8,000 things." And here's the thing: I don't know how familiar you are with Max Richter as a composer.
I'm not.
He's overused. He's overused. Not because I don't think he deserves it. He's, I think, a very, very good postmodern, post-classical or neoclassical style composer. Very, very emotive and very, very. It draws emotion out of you as a listener really, really well, which is why it hits really hard. Which is why they have him do the soundtrack for a show like The Leftovers, or again, this one song on The Nature of Daylight gets used in 10,000 things, and every time it gets used, it's for a tearjerker moment. And even if the other thing doesn't land, the music draws the emotion out of you because it's just that kind of song. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So I was thinking about Max Richter, and I was like, you know, I know he's done more than this stuff that gets used in maudlin TV and games. And like, again, the song itself, not maudlin, but in its usage has become, I associate that song with the feeling that is treacly or maudlin. But I knew he had to do other stuff, so I just was like clicking through his Spotify page. And so in 2012, Max Richter sat down and said, "Do you know what I should do? I should recompose the Four Seasons by Antonio Vivaldi."
Okay. That's a move.
That's a flex. That's coming in with some big dick energy, if you will excuse my turn of phrase. The question is, though,
100%.
Does he earn it? Because, like, first off, you're like, okay, recomposed. What does that mean? Basically, what he does is he takes the themes, the motifs, the melodies that we are all familiar with from the Four Seasons. One of the most famous, movements of music to ever be written. Personally, my favorite example of Baroque music. I think the Four Seasons is a banger. I could listen to it literally any time.
Sure.
And
there's a reason it is so it is such a seminal work.
It's incredible. It does all of the stuff I like about Baroque music and eschews all the stuff I don't like about Baroque music. It's wonderful. But so he takes it and remixes it, essentially. He calls it recomposition because that's what you call a piece of classical music, but it is essentially what in popular music we would call a remix. And he takes a lot of the elements that you expect from the Four Seasons and puts them into new contexts while still maintaining the feel and the flow of the original piece. And I was again, when I saw it, I was like, that's a ballsy move, my guy. I don't know that you have earned this. And then I started listening to it, and honestly, he kind of earned it.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is. Here's the thing. I'm not saying it's better than the Four Seasons. It's not better than Vivaldi's The Four Seasons. But is it a wonderful complementary way to think about the Four Seasons in new ways I've never thought about the Four Seasons before? Yes, it is. I was listening to it like a ton this last couple of days, and I was talking to my spouse about it yesterday, and we were driving in the car, and I was like, I got to play this for you. And so I pulled out Winter, the fourth of the four pieces. I started playing it for her, and I was like, okay, this is the original Winter. Get it in your brain. Everyone knows this piece of music. And, it gets to the exciting part that everybody knows. And then I'm like, okay, now we got to go listen to this Max Richter version, and you got to tell me what he's doing here, because what he's doing seems so simple, but is changing the way that I am fundamentally feeling about this piece of music. And so what he does is he takes the part everyone knows of Winter, it's a 4/4, and he says, yo, what if we made this a 7/8 and I just dropped the last half beat from every one of these measures?
All right.
Because it's that part where there's a fair amount of repetition at the end of each of the measures. And he's like, well, what if I just cut one of those repetitions out and suddenly it's 7/8 instead of 4/4? And it gives the piece of music an impetus and a rhythm and like a forward motion that it does not have when it is in common time, because it's what you expect music to be in. And we both have listened to a lot of progressive rock, and your wife is a classical music person. We've both listened to a lot of classical music. When you start playing with those uncommon time signatures, it creates motion and impetus because they're not what standard Western music works within. And just a little change like that fundamentally alters the way that you feel about the piece, because it is going faster because an eighth of each measure is missing, but it feels so much more propulsive and so much more like it's got a motor underneath it in a way that it didn't used to have. And that's just one example of the sorts of things that he's doing in this piece, in this suite of music, that is just wild.
That's fascinating.
If you are a Four Seasons listener, everyone's a Four Seasons listener. Who are we kidding? It's one of the most famous pieces of music ever written. I would really recommend just sitting down 45 minutes and just taking a listen to it and being like, what does he do here? How does he recontextualize things? How does he take famous lines and then add a couple extra measures at the end with a more postmodern like view towards the way that rhythm and resolution work in music? Or he takes this, what would be a short melody, and he really elongates it in ways that Baroque music simply does not let a single note hang in that way. But
right,
you can if it's not really Baroque music anymore. And so he takes and makes this short melody 30 seconds long instead of a 4-second little thing, and pulls it over the top of the rest of the music. It's really astonishing to listen to. And the more you know the Four Seasons, and the fresher it is in your brain, the more astonishing it is to listen to and be like, I don't know how this works so well, but it actually really works.
Well, I'll definitely have to check it out.
It's really cool. I'd really recommend it. All right, some other stuff I've been doing. I have been watching a couple of TV shows that I think are worth mentioning. And one of them will lead into some of the games and other stuff I need to talk about, so I'll do that really quick. So first off, I had a friend who introduced me to an old 80s TV show called Sledgehammer. Have you ever heard of that show?
Oh, yeah, totally.
I had never heard of it before. And it's really funny. It's an extremely funny TV show. It for those of you who maybe don't know it, unlike Peter, it's basically, what if Dirty Harry was like funny instead of not funny?
Yeah, a goofball instead of a badass.
Yeah, I mean, he thinks he's a badass, but like
exactly
the situations in which Sledgehammer finds himself are absurd, absurd played for laughs, unlike in Dirty Harry, which is absurd played for racism. So, yeah. I mean, I have opinions on the Dirty Harry movies, and none of them are very positive. I know our father has fondness for those movies, and I used to until I watched them as an adult, and I was like, yo, these are not just racist, these are virulently racist. But that's neither here nor there. So is Sledgehammer, but that's the joke, is that he personally is a virulently racist. And so that's the kind of show it is. It's like, what if Dirty Harry was doing all the Dirty Harry things taken to 11 in a world that realizes that this is comedy and farce and not to be taken serious. So it's pretty funny. I also have been continuing, I think I've mentioned it maybe, but I have been continuing my watch of the show Star Wars Rebels on Disney+. It's just a really good show. If you want extremely digestible, extremely easy to watch, 20-minute episodes. You put them on while you sit down to eat your lunch because you work from home and you don't want to be looking at your spreadsheets or your word processor anymore. And it's just really compulsively watchable. It's just a very watchable show. I'm like halfway through the third season, and some really big swings were taken in the second season that were really, really exciting. And so I have just been continuing my journey through Star Wars that I never got around to watching when it was fresh. And what really motivated me to start back on Rebels was I played the entirety of Jedi Survivor in I think 3 days.
Okay, cool.
The game rules. That's what I'll say about that.
I'm glad to hear it. I have not yet started it. We bought it on the Xbox. I know that at least Gareth has started it. I don't know if Alex has. Gareth, though, I will say, is now completely consumed by Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah.
So I don't know when he's going to get back to it. Yeah, we've talked about that. But
that's fair.
No, I definitely want to. I definitely want to give Jedi Survivor a try. And the good news is Gareth did inform me that there's a nice little sort of recap, what happened in the first game at the beginning.
There is.
So I don't have to go back and play that. Thank goodness. I don't know whose idea that was. Whoever it was, they deserve some kind of medal because, hey, you know what? There are those of us who want to pay for and buy those games, and we don't have time to replay them. So
it's true.
Being considerate of us, I appreciate that.
It's true. It's a short recap. If you did not play the first game, it's probably enough to get you to hit the ground running. But especially if you have played the first game, which I know you did and I had, it was more than enough to be like, oh yeah, I'm reminded of all of the stakes. I am reminded of the big things that happened in that first game. And it hits the ground running really well. It's set about 5 years after the first game. A lot of things have happened that were apparently in a book that I will never read that apparently the game just basically ignores too. So that's fine.
Perfect.
The beauty of transmedia is that the game can be like, whatever. They hired some author to write some book in between our games. We'll just be like, whatever. It'll explain why Grease has a robot arm now. Guess what? I don't care why Grease has a robotic arm now. He just has a robot arm. It's fine. But apparently the book explains why Grease lost his arm. I don't care. All I know is Grease is back and it's greasy money, baby. A game ruled. Survivor took everything I liked about Fallen Order and upped it and took all of the stuff that I didn't really like about Fallen Order and was like, yo, what if that was either gone or if it's still here, it works a lot better. And I was like, okay. It was an improvement in literally every way from the first game.
That is excellent news.
It was really good. I know that Tears of the Kingdom is going to be on every publication's best of the year. Like that's going to be the game of the year for everywhere. But it's a shame because Jedi Survivor is probably going to be my game of the year. I mean, we'll see how Final Fantasy 16 turns out. But like Jedi Survivor was extremely rewarding as an experience. The movement feels a lot more fluid and a lot more solid. It doesn't feel like... Most of the time it felt pretty good in that first game, but occasionally it was just kind of janky. I felt like, especially with the wall running, occasionally I would miss it, and then I'd be like, well, crap. And I'd have to reload and blah, 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 blah. The movement feels like they've clicked it into place better this time, which is exciting.
You know what I could only hope is that somebody from what is it, Respawn, who made the Titanfall games, could help them out with that, because
they made this game too.
Is it the same team?
Yeah, it's the Titanfall team that makes Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. But
see, I didn't realize they'd made Jedi Fallen Order.
It didn't work as well in Jedi Fallen Order as it did in Titanfall 2.
I was going to say, in Titanfall 2, it was the best I think I'd ever felt. Like, I've never had game movement feel as just good and kinetic as it feels in Titanfall 2.
Well,
so
I will say Survivor is a lot closer to Titanfall 2 than it was to Fallen Order. It feels a lot tighter. There are parts where you are legit off the ground for 30, 45 seconds because you are doing weird Jedi hyper competence stuff. And like, also a nice thing about it, they don't take your abilities away, which is one of the things that almost always happens in a sequel like this. Is they're like, well, we'll take you back to base one and to, first base, and then you got to go back and get all of these things that you lost. No, I got my Jedi double jump from the very first part of the game. I'm a Jedi, of course I can double jump.
As it should be. That makes
fine.
Sense.
Of course I can do all 3 of the lightsaber stances that I unlocked in the first game. It's fine. I'll give you 2 more in this game, and they're both better than the ones in the first game.
There you go. I mean, that just makes sense.
This one gives you lightsaber and gun.
I like it. I'm looking forward to playing it.
How can you lose? Also, it gives you two-handed lightsaber. It gives you Zweihander style lightsaber, and they make it seem like it's heavy. Why is the lightsaber heavy? I don't know, but he's sure swinging it. He's sure swinging it like it weighs 45 pounds, and it rules.
That's awesome.
Anyway, I really liked it. I fell in love with it. I liked the first one a lot. I think we've talked about it, but this one was better in every respect. I felt like the story was simultaneously smaller but more important than the first game. And there is a series of set pieces on a certain planet at about midway, maybe 60% of the way through the game, that is astonishing and one of the coolest set pieces I've ever played in a video game. And I don't want to tell you anymore because it would spoil it, but if and when you play that game, we need to have a spoiler chat about it here, because that sequence at the end of a big temple sequence, that's all I'll say, is like, yo, it's really good.
Well, I will definitely be playing it. I'll just need to kick some butt and get people off of the Xbox so that I can have a shot at it. But luckily
Tears of the Kingdom's on the Switch, so that's one less person you got to kick off.
Correct. I'm only going to have to fight for time from Alex. So,
well, after I finished Jedi Survivor, I was like, well, I need to play more video games, and so I played 3 other video games. Not to completion, but I played a fair amount of them, and worth mentioning. Sure. I think I mentioned a few months ago that I was playing a little bit of Atelier Ryza, which is one of the Atelier games. I've mentioned them before. They're like a series of JRPGs that entail you being like a young woman running an alchemy workshop. And Ryza didn't really click with me, but I think it would now after I've played more of this other one, because I've been playing a fair amount of Sophie, which is from the trilogy before the Ryza trilogy. They basically usually come out in trilogy sets. This company has made like 20 of these suckers in the last 20 years. Like these, Jeez. There are a lot of Atelier. Many of them aren't even available in English, but like they have not wasted time making Atelier games, and it's because they're fairly simple. Like Atelier Sophie, I go to places, I fight monsters if I need to, or I collect stuff, and then I go back to my my workshop, and I brew potions and shit. Like I throw things in my alchemy cauldron. I like try to make them fit on the board so I can get more bonuses, and that's like the whole game. Like it is the ultimate in podcast game, because like most of the time I don't need to be paying any attention to any. There's not really any story. I am just Sophie and her friends running around, fighting monsters, collecting ingredients, making potions, selling them to the townspeople so that I can make more money. Like, that's the game.
Very cool.
But I'm really enjoying it. I also, I have mentioned on the podcast a couple of times that I've played a fair amount of Genshin Impact, which is like, what if Breath of the Wild was anime girls? Which, let's. What if Breath of the Wild was free, had extremely predatory gotcha mechanics and anime girls? Okay, that's Genshin Impact. Again, I like that game a lot, but I'd be the first one to say that the gotcha mechanics in that game are extremely predatory and should be illegal. Because it would be way too easy to bilk people for money. And they've made billions of dollars on that game. Like, no question, billions of dollars. So like, people are getting taken advantage of by a very clear gambling system built into that game. So that's indefensible. However, I do still play the game. I just don't engage with that stuff. Sure. But that company put out their newest game in the last couple of weeks called Honkai Star Rail, which is the way I would describe it is baby's first turn-based RPG. Because it's like, I've played a fair amount of those Persona games. We've talked about them here. You're running around, you run into monsters. It starts a turn-based combat where you are trying to find elemental weaknesses and use your elemental attacks that are strong against the weaknesses of enemies and trying to buff your weaknesses in the face of attacks from enemies, that sort of stuff. This is like that, but a lot simpler than Persona is. Because, in Persona, you've got 8 spells on each one of your characters and each one of your personas. This game has 2 buttons. It's basic attack and special attack. And then you also have an ultimate. But that's like it. And so it's a lot about team composition because, again, this is a game where you're supposed to collect a lot of people that have different elemental abilities, So you'll see when you're going into a battle, okay, this battle I need to have some sort of electricity, I need to have wind, I need to have ice, and I need to have, physical, like just fighting. Because those are the recommended elements. So I got to look through my roster, see who I have, and then go into the battle with them. And I'm really enjoying it. I think that the story is really well done. I really like a lot of the characters in the game. And the way in which the combat is not dumbed down, but like simplified enough to not make me work really hard. Like there's never a point where I'm sitting there for a minute thinking, I'm not sure what I should do. Like it is 5 to 10 seconds deciding what should my course of action be, because I can't do things like change turn order. I can't do things like, there's a lot of the stuff that would be in a more complex turn-based game that just is not there. So a lot of it is just like, okay, I got to plan ahead a little bit, but I'm not playing like big brain mastermind where I'm thinking 30 moves ahead. I'm only thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead. And it's fairly simple, but still challenging enough and rewarding enough that I'm having a good time with it. And again, it is free with extremely predatory gotcha mechanics. So if you are not a person who is prone to gambling, then I think it's a great game, because I have not spent a single penny on it, and I've had a great time, and I'm keeping playing it for now, and I'll never give them a penny. But it's fine. It's a fun game. If, however, you are the kind of person who has trouble with gambling, do not ever play a Hoyoverse game. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because you'll spend $10,000 to get the perfect team with the best meta. And why? Why did you do that? Why did you spend $10,000 on a video game? Don't do that.
Yeah, no.
And then the last thing I will mention, I know we've been going for almost a half an hour at this point, but I had a lot of things I've done. I am almost done. I'm almost done with the game Demon X Machina, which is a mech game because, FromSoft, people who make your Elden's Ring and your Dark's Soul, they've got a new game coming out, Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon. They made the Armored Core games back in the early 2000s. Big mechs, big fights, incredible set pieces. They look great. I've never played one, but they look incredible. And I'm like, maybe I should try Armored Core 6. And so I was talking to some friends in a Discord, and I was like, I am interested in the Armored Core series. And they were like, well, do you want to pirate things, or do you already own this when they gave it away in the Epic Game Store for free? And I was like, oh, Demon X Machina is, hey, you guys aren't putting out Armored Core anymore, so we're just going to make an Armored Core. And they're like, yes, that's exactly what it is. So in terms of the gameplay, apparently Demon Ex Machina is just like playing an Armored Core game. And I have been having a great time building a weird big mech and figuring out which weapons to put on it and which legs do I need to put on, because is it more important that they've got better armor? Is it more important that I can scuttle along the ground faster? And the story sucks. It's dumb. It's really poorly told. But the mech on mech action is extremely fast and extremely fun. And it's not that long, and I got it for free, so I'm going to finish it. I've got I think 4 or 5 missions left to finish the game, so I'll probably finish it tonight or tomorrow, and I'm happy with the time I've spent with it.
Cool.
All right, but speaking of things we should know whether or not we were happy with the time we spent with them, it is time to talk about Gamera 3, Revenge of Iris. We are wrapping up our coverage of the Gamera trilogy from the 1990s with the end. It's the end. It's all over. So before we go into the summary, what did you think about this one, Peter?
Well, so I texted you, and a little inside baseball. We're recording a few days later than usual because, again, life was just kind of crazy for me the last few days. And so I had texted Eden and told them, I'm looking forward to talking about this. I have feelings. And so I'm just going to start with my feelings.
Please.
And I think the best way I can express those feelings is to say it was profound disappointment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
I did not enjoy this one.
Okay.
I did not think that it was bad. It's not something where I was, oh my gosh, what a terrible movie. But it felt very different.
Yes.
To me. And I'm really interested to hear your opinions on this. But I think the key thing for me is the first 2 movies felt like big kaiju, just let's go kind of movies with some other things peppered in, some what are we doing to the planet? And, you had talked about, Gamera's kind of connection with humanity and this sort of thing. But this one to me felt like this is much more of a psychological movie that happens to involve big monsters.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that analysis of it.
And I was coming into this off the high that was Gamera 2, where it's like, hell yeah, big monsters beating each other up. And this one, while it still has some of that part felt way less important or central to the movie.
Sure.
Again, it felt like even in the big final battle between Iris and Gamera, it felt like what was happening between the 2 monsters was the sideshow. And what was happening with the human characters and, this one girl and her link to Iris and then Asagi and kind of her previous link to Gamera and everything. It felt like this was much more the focus of the movie. And I'm not saying that's bad, but it's not what I was coming into it for.
Yeah. The feel of this one is very different than the first 2.
Oh, hugely different. And I'm glad to hear you say that because again, the neophyte that I am when it comes to these types of movies, I thought maybe it was just the mood I was in the night I watched it, or maybe it was this, or maybe it was that, but it felt so incredibly different. And again, not bad. I want to make it clear. I did not feel that this was like a lesser movie than the first and second. I don't know if I feel like I could really opine on that. But what I definitely felt like was that for me, what I had enjoyed so much about, especially the second, but also the first, they just felt fun. This movie did not feel fun to me.
No, this one does not have the attitude and the sentiment of this film are very different than the other 2. And the way that I felt about it, I think I mentioned last episode that when I first watched this trilogy a few years ago, I remember thinking Revenge of Iris was my very favorite. And I don't know that that's not still true, but I will say that, like, this film, especially in comparison to the first two, especially in comparison to Advent of Legion, is a land of contrasts, because it simultaneously feels like some of the parts are even more yo than the last one was, but often I'm like sad that in a way that I'm not when I'm watching the other ones. And so, and you know, sometimes this even comes down to like the special effects. Sometimes the special effects look better than they've looked in any of these movies, and sometimes you're like, yo, that CG was pretty dodgy, guys. That was not a good one. That was not a good one. And so it feels like this movie encompasses both the highest highs and the lowest lows that this series has to offer. And I think a lot of that comes down to, like you said, the scope and the feel are just very different here, because it is not this one. It feels far more like a psychological, like you said, like a psychological film, like a thing about interiority and about how we process trauma, rather than let's just watch the monsters destroy some shit.
For sure.
And I think that it works. I think it really works. I still, like I said, I still think it's probably my favorite of the three, but I can see how you would come out of it saying, I don't know that this one worked for me. Because it just feels different. It just feels very different.
It does. And that's where this, out of all of the three of these, is the one I would be most interested in coming back and watching again in 6 to 12 months time.
Yeah.
Because I rolled into this with this vibe from the first two movies. And, you know, there was definitely a progression between 1 and 2, but it felt like 2 was more kind of like we talked about a couple of weeks ago. It was more a refinement of the formula of 1, an improvement upon it. It was taking what we had in 1, and it was making it just a little bit more and a little bit better and a little tighter and all this stuff. Whereas this one felt like, it just kind of comes out of left field.
Yeah.
And I would be really curious to see my personal feelings about this movie with distance between those first two, and now kind of understanding, oh, this is a very, very different movie.
Yeah.
Coming in and watching it and seeing, how do I feel about it?
That would be very interesting. But before we go any further, quick recap for those of you who maybe haven't seen these movies. However, as we said last time and the time before, they're all on Amazon. Just go watch them. They're great.
They are. They're right there.
So this one takes place 3 years after the other ones, which again, this movie came out 3 years after that too. And I think that says something too. Whereas the first two were made back to back within a year of each other, there are 3 years between those two and this one. And I think that that adds to that feeling, that different tone to it. So 3 years have passed. Nagamine is back, the ornithologist from the first movie, and is trying to figure out what's happening with the Gyaos, because they are now going all over the world. They're appearing all over, and she is trying to figure it out. Also, we meet some weird, like, occultist people who are just being real weirdos. And we'll talk about them a little bit. But there's like a guy and a girl who are just real fucking weirdos. And they think that
is for sure.
They think that Gamera is like an evil spirit or something, and they're just like being little freaks. And they're in the background of this whole movie. Gamera shows up. Some of these Gyaos appear. The film calls them hyper Gyaos because they have evolved. And so some of them show up in Shibuya. Gamera shows up, messes them up, accidentally kills 20,000 people in the process. That's all. Just 20,000 people. And so needless to say, the government is like, okay, we're done with this big turtle man. We got to kill him. We got to stop him. And while all of this is happening, we're also getting the story of Ayana, who is a young girl whose parents were killed by Gamera accidentally in the Gyaos fight in the first movie. This is, flashbacks to the first movie when Gamera is like thrown into a building by the Gyaos running into him. Oops. her parents were in there going after her cat Iris, who wouldn't come out from under the bed. Now her parents are dead. And she watched Gamera destroy the entire building that her parents were in. So needless to say, girl holds a grudge.
Yes, she does.
And so she has been moved out to the country now. She's not in Shibuya anymore. Or I guess she was in Tokyo in the first movie, but she's not in Tokyo anymore. She's out in the country village with her, like aunt and uncle or whatever. And there's a small old village temple out there that's closed off. She's bullied by some kids, and like they get her to go in there because they're all scared of it. And inside she finds a stone egg. And eventually the egg hatches. She's the one who finds the creature inside, and the creature basically imprints upon her. She names the creature Iris after her cat. And she also finds a magatama, one of those pendants that Asagi had in the first two movies, shaped different, a little black and a little more menacing looking. But through that through that magatama starts forging an emotional connection with Iris, the way that Asagi had forged an emotional connection with Gamera. Iris starts to grow. It absorbs her into it. But one of her classmates, who is the kid whose family is tasked with guarding the temple, and this egg that was in the temple to make sure that it never arises, cuts her out of it, saves her. Iris goes sicko mode, kills half the village, eats them, and grows into the adult form. The military tries to attack it, doesn't work, flies off to Kyoto because Ayana has been taken to Kyoto by the weird freaky people who think that Gamera is evil. And on the way, Nagamine gets like tied into all this stuff because she's working with the government trying to figure out what's happening. There's this new monster that has appeared. Iris is real weird looking. It's a real weird design. I think ultimately I think that the Mother Legion design was better, but this one works too in a really alien way. I can see that. Because Nagamine is tied into all this stuff, Asagi calls her and is like, "Yo, is this thing attached to somebody? Something's going on." I'm in college now, and I've been doing study abroad trying to figure out how my connection with Gamera worked. So she comes back. They eventually find Ayana, and Iris is attacking Kyoto looking for Ayana. Gamera shows up. They have a big in midair battle, which, like I say, the CGI is pretty dodgy in the aerial battle. But once they land, we're right as rain when it comes to the fights. But they land into the train station in Kyoto, and the monsters run into each other. They're fighting on the ground. Iris kicks Gamera's butt, even worse than the Mother Legion did in a lot of ways. He impales him through the middle, like you can see through him, and then just like leaves him there on the ground. And then Iris goes and picks up Ayana and shoves Ayana into its heart, and therefore like having that connection that it was building from when it was a little baby. Also, the weirdo freaks get killed by the train station falling apart, and the weirdo freak dude is like, "Oh boy, I'm dying. This is scary." It's real weird. His character does not work for me. I'll just say that. The weird lady,
not at all.
The weird lady, I get it. This works. The weird computer programmer guy who makes a video game about how mana works, don't get him. But that's neither here nor there. So Ayana gets sucked into Iris, realizes that her hatred and bitterness have created this monster, and is like, "Oh no, what have I done?" And right as that happens, Gamera gets up, shoves his hand into Iris's chest, pulls her out, and saves her. And so Iris gets mad, impales Gamera's other hand, and starts sucking energy out of Gamera. Oh, because that's how Iris grows. Iris doesn't have a mouth. It impales things with its tentacles and then sucks the juices out of it, and that's how it grows and gets stronger. So it impales Gamera and starts sucking Gamera powers out of him, and like creating fireballs with Gamera's DNA that it's sucking in. And so Gamera does the most heavy metal thing that he has done in any of these movies.
Yes, he does.
Fireballs his own hand off, absorbs the fireballs that Iris was making with its tentacles into a fiery fist of doom, and just like pile drives it into Iris's open chest wound that he ripped a kid out of earlier. Which obviously, that's game over, guys. That's game over. He punched him in the heart with a fire fist. And so Iris is dead. Gamera sets Ayana down. And Nagamine and Asagi are trying to revive her. They don't seem to be doing anything. Gamera roars, awakens Ayana. And then she looks up at him. They like make eye contact, and then he starts to shuffle away. And she's like, why would he have saved me? And then the movie ends with one of the bleakest possible endings I could have imagined they gave this movie. As thousands of Gyaos start swarming the coast of Japan, ready to dive into Kyoto. And Gamera, missing a foot, or missing his arm, a huge hole in his chest, just leans back and roars to the sky. And Asagi's like, he's going to fight till it's over. That's what he does. And that's how the movie ends, with like this almost nihilistic ending as Gamera roars in defiance as the city is in like flames and carnage around him, and thousands of Gyaos are about to descend upon him. And that's the movie.
That is the movie.
And then it ends with the title Gamera, 1999. The absolute guardian of the universe. And that's how the movie ends. It's a weird one. It's a really weird one. I think it really works, but it feels so different than the other two.
Yeah, it really does.
And like, I think the reason it works for me, even though I wish there'd been a little more Gamera in it, always could use with more monsters in the movie. But I also understand there's a lot less of him in this one than in the other two. Also, he looks meaner than ever in this one. I think I said last time he's going to get meaner looking. Oh, he's real mean looking in this one. Like,
yeah, he is.
His shell is like, they did a lot of really interesting work in his like creature design. His shell, like the plates of it can move and ripple, which is really weird and a little disconcerting. And his face just looks meaner, and like his eyes are smaller, and just like he's just more vicious looking. And that, to be fair, again, in the fight in Shibuya, he kills 20,000 people, just like trying to take out the Gyaos. He's just doing his job. But you can tell that like something has happened fundamentally. Like his connection with humanity is gone, and while he still is trying to protect them where he can, there's this one little kid that's like, oh, he saved me. He's like, well, he saved you, and 20,000 other people died in that attack. So lucky for you, little guy. Not so lucky for the other people in this town.
I mean, I wrote down at one point, I'm like, bodies are just flying.
Oh,
I mean, there's this scene in there where you just see just hundreds of bodies just flying into the air with this fireball behind them. I mean, it wasn't holding any, pulling any punches.
He does not seem like the good guy in that fight, even though like ontologically, I think that you're supposed to understand he's the good guy in that fight. She sure does not seem like it. He does not seem like it in that fight, even though Gyaos is there. Like, and the Gyaos suit looks way better than the first movie. There's this scene where he like knocks it out of the sky, and its eyeball is like hanging out of its skull, and it's like,
it's pretty gruesome.
It's pretty gross, bro. That's pretty gross. But yeah, this movie really does, like I said, feel like a land of contrasts in a lot of ways, differently than the other ones, where I feel like when it's working, it's really, really working, but the pacing is a lot slower. The movie feels a lot slower. It's only about 10 minutes longer, but it feels a lot more than 10 minutes longer.
Yeah, it does. And that was the first thing that I really noticed and that kind of jumped out at me was it was taking, I mean, I mentioned this when we got to Gamera 2. It felt much more immediate. We were like,
Yeah.
it was, we kind of hit the ground running. And with this, we've got the flashback and we have all the setup and not bad things, but it was a different enough feel that even from the beginning, I could tell we were in for something different. This was a different movie.
Well, it's a lot. Again, it's still a huge monster movie where like literally 20,000 people die in one scene. But like the fact of the matter is it feels smaller and quieter in a lot of respects than the other films.
Definitely.
And I'm not sure how else to describe it than that, but the scope feels smaller in terms of the main story because we're so hyper-focused on Ayana and how she feels like so much hatred for Gamera taking her family from her. And that hatred becomes embodied in this other creature that then does all of the same things, takes her second family from her, kills her entire extended family except for her brother who somehow survived, but like everyone else gets got, and destroys so much of the town that she was living in, eats half of the village, and like it's almost like it's a movie about the effects of grief and the way that grief and not processing your trauma will cause you to traumatize others. And that is what this movie feels like it is about. And that is not what either of the first two movies are about. I can't boil Gamera Guardian of the Universe down to a psychological treatise on how if you experience trauma and do not work through your trauma in a productive way, you will enact trauma on others. Like, I can't do that with Guardian of the Universe. That was just a big turtle man. A big turtle man kills some ugly birds. And so I think that's why it still works for me, even though I still think that there's a lot of it that feels kind of sloppy in comparison to the other two.
Yeah. Like I say, it was just different enough. And I didn't anticipate that.
Yeah.
So I came into it going, cool. It's number 3. Let's go. And it was very...
It's just a very different tone.
It's not what I'll... Yeah, it really is.
It's a very different tone. Some other things that are worth mentioning. As I said in the second movie, our detective friend is back in this third movie.
This poor chap.
But he gets it together in the end.
Yeah, he kind of does.
So the situation with him is he is now a bum. After his experience with Gamera, or with the Gyaos and the Gamera in the first movie, and with the Legion creature in the second movie, he is now a homeless person living on the streets of Tokyo. And Nagamine sees him and is like, come on, like, let's talk. And is able to get him to realize what has happened and how he can still try to help people. And so he basically teams up with Nagamine again, and becomes like her right-hand person as she's trying to figure out what's going on. And I thought that was a really nice kind of redemption arc for him. Also, I just have to say, what happened between 1995 and 1999? How did he get hot? He was ugly in the first two movies, and suddenly he like went gray and let his hair grow out to cover his bald spots a little better and got a bit more tan. And suddenly I was like, why is Inspector Osako kind of hot? What the fuck? But he is. He is. I hate to say it, folks. He's kind of hot. So that's weird. I love that Nagamine was able to come back and tie in with that first movie. I really wish they had gotten any of the people from the second movie back too. I think it would have been great to get the scientists from the second movie and Nagamine on screen at the same time. I don't know how we couldn't do that, but whatever. It was fun to have Asagi come back. Also, I don't think I've mentioned this on either of the previous 2 episodes. Do you know who Asagi's dad is? Did you look this up at all?
I did not.
That's Steven Seagal's kid.
No.
Yeah, Asagi is Steven Seagal's kid from when he was living in Japan in the 80s.
Oh my gosh, that's insane.
Right? It's wild. He was married to a Aikido master named Miyako Fujitani, and he and she got pregnant back in the late 70s, And that's where Ayako Fujitani comes from. She is Steven Seagal's kid, and she was in the Gamera movies and made a couple other films and has since become a writer, and she is a writer now.
Wow.
But yeah, Steven Seagal's daughter. That's weird. But once you say it, you're like,
oh, you can see it.
I can see it. That's
you
the
can see it. The second you said it, I'm like, yep.
She's got Steven Seagal's face shape.
Yep. That's funny.
It's real weird. Yeah. Anyway, any other thoughts on this film? Before I will say, I really enjoyed it, but the second it ended with that like real downer of an ending, I will not lie, dear listener. I immediately took that Blu-ray out of my Blu-ray player and put 2006's Gamera the Brave into my DVD player and watched it in its entirety immediately following this one. Because I was like, do you know what I need now? Because this was great. I really enjoyed it, but it was very bummer of an ending. I need a Gamera movie that doesn't end as a bummer. So I'm going to watch Gamera the Brave literally right now. And I did, and it was great. That movie also still rules. Not in the continuity with this movie, but it does end like that movie starts. This is not a spoiler for what happens in that movie, because this is literally the first 2 minutes of that movie. The first 2 minutes of that movie is set in the 70s. Gamera is being attacked by a huge thing of Gyaos. He does the chest open attack, and it kills all the Gyaos, but it also kills him. And then the movie is set in the present day as Gamera reincarnates and starts as a little baby box turtle in a little guy's hand. And then he grows up because he's got to protect the people.
I might have to watch this one too.
Yeah, I would recommend it. I think Gamera the Brave... I still think this trilogy is probably better, but Gamera the Brave is one of my very favorite kaiju movies ever. It's so much more guileless and like clearly designed to be like a kids feel good version of Gamera, like the Showa era Gamera had been, instead of this darker, more serious version of Gamera. And honestly, it really works in as a follow-up to how dark this one ended.
Like I say, I thought this was interesting. It wasn't what I was coming in for. It was a bit of a kind of a hard turn.
Yeah.
Which I think that with a little bit of time and a little distance, I would be really interested to see my thoughts in going back and watching it again. So I might have to do that. But, really, I think a number of months, 6, 12 months down the road, really give myself some distance and then see how I approach it, see how it sort of strikes me.
Yeah, for sure. I think that would be an interesting thing to revisit in a few months as well. But like I say, if you were into Gamera and you're like, I want more Gamera, there's the goofy Showa era movies. They're great. They were almost all of them on MST3K back in the 90s. So that's the type of movie you're getting if you watch the 60s and 70s Gamera movies. The kinds of things that you would watch Crow make jokes about. So just know that going in. They're good, but they're not good. But if you want a good Gamera movie to follow up these ones, go watch Gamera the Brave. Came out in 2006. It's wonderful. It's just really incredibly good. It has some of the best suit work, because he's just a little guy. He's not grown up yet. He's just a little guy, and so he's just like he's a little cuter. Like his face is a lot more round because he's just like a little guy. Huh. It's really good. But I think that's where we'll leave it. I think that I'm really glad that we took the time to watch these movies. It seems like you enjoyed them. And I did
definitely.
That was the goal. I wanted to, share these with you because I think that they're really incredible and really worthwhile and a good example of this genre that I love so much. And these are 3 really solid, and in the case of this third one, different from one another, entrants in a series and in a genre that I'm quite a big fan of.
Sure. No, it was a very interesting set of movies to watch, and I'm glad we watched it. So,
well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And with no further ado, then I guess we'll wrap up now. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to share with us, you can always email us at feedback@themiddleofculture.com. Go ahead and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us 5 stars, because 5 stars makes Gamera really happy. And maybe he won't kill 20,000 people if he's happy. I don't know. Maybe he got up on the wrong side of the bed. He saw that we got 2 stars from somebody.
It's true. It's true.
All right. And so then, until next time, have a great week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.